Welcome to Code and Concrete, the leading podcast for prop tech, conversations about the built environment, and other exciting innovations. If you learn something new, please consider following and leaving a positive review. Enjoy. Hi folks, joining me in this studio today, I have Ben Gilliland, and he is the founder and chairman of Future Proof Property Intelligence, a public benefit corporation using AI, property intelligence, and climate-resilient construction methods to help homeowners understand and reduce disaster risk. With more than 55 years of experience across design, technology, structured finance, venture capital, and patented innovation, Ben has spent the last several years building practical solutions for wildlife, flood, wind, heat, and other climate-driven threats to the built environment. Ben, thank you so much for joining me on Code and Concrete.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here. We're always looking to try to get the word out on what America and the rest of the world is facing.
And I think you're covering very important topics, even if people don't perceive them as immediately urgent. In fact, I think we'll dive into that. This is the train on the railroad tracks that we're tied to, as you alluded to, that's coming our way, whether we recognize it or not. But before we dive into that, let's learn a little bit more about you. What was your background? It seems like you've been all over the place. So maybe let's start at the beginning and sum up those decades.
This is my sixth career, which was really unintentional. When my late wife and I moved here 12 years ago, she was retiring as an Olympic equestrian and was just literally hanging up her spurs for that. And I had basically decided I was just going to measure up 2 palm trees for a hammock and just kind of chill. I had started my first career with my first company back when I was 15 and a half years old, which was a rock and roll lighting and special effects company. I did that for 12 years with many, many major acts during the big hair era. Basically, I had a friend of mine called me when I was in Los Angeles, said, you need to come up here to Northern California. It wasn't even Silicon Valley at that point in time. It was, there's this crazy thing they're doing up here called the personal computer. And you ought to get on up here and take a look at it. So we were always trying to automate stuff on these special effects. We had one particular tour that we had 6 guys with 10 fingers pushing buttons, hopefully about at the same time, for things to blow up and all sorts of other stuff that was going on. So I was attracted to the concept of being able to, actually automate these things. Anyway, I wound up getting up there, did some venture capital. It was the golden age of computing. You just drive around. Danny would have something crazy on the spaghetti supper table in his garage, and he would do his pitch, and we would kind of sit there and you stroke your chin and say, well, is this something that's really going to become a thing, and so we put money into the spelling checkers, probably the claim to fame as far as that's concerned. And I tell people that I take no responsibility for the fact that autocorrect exists these days, but I probably have to take the blame for the fact no one can spell as a result of that particular little piece of technology. But anyway, I figured out that you don't really have to have a product. You just push money from point A to point B, take a few basis points as it goes by, moved to London, England, did structured finance over there for 10 or 12 years for super tankers, big ticket stuff. In 2000, decided that I no longer wanted to be part of the money business, so to speak. It has a lot of pressure. So I bought a sailboat, moved to Key West, Florida, salvaged treasure with Mel Fisher for 2 years and wrote 3 books. Met my wife, moved to her horse farm in Tennessee, got into doing high-end kitchen and bath remodeling, got licensed as a general contractor, and was doing that with retail facilities for that in the local mall, and 5 designers and 15 projects going at one time. So from there, we came over here. One of the things that we really had always felt was why we wanted to be here was the people. The Hawaiian culture is still very strong. It's kind of like almost going back in time in people's sense of community. They'll check on each other over the fence. Hey, we haven't seen Tutu in a while. What's going on? And it just has a kind of an old fashioned, if the term applies to a sense of community. And so she wanted to do something. We have a big affordable housing problem here. We lose 5,000 young people and seniors a month now who can't afford to live here. Our industry is basically Mai Tais and sunburns. in the hospitality business, and you can't afford a $1.5 million house that's less than 1,000 square feet. So most of the people who are the backbone workforce in Hawaii just keep getting pushed off into smaller and smaller spaces. In this case, where I am on the Big Island of Hawaii, they keep getting pushed down to the south end where the volcano is, which has no water. You have to use catchment. It has no power. You have to use solar. And a lot of these houses are just single wall construction up on stilts that are on fields of lava. And that just wasn't right. So we decided we would come up with a nonprofit. We designed a whole new approach to being able to build houses, which was half what those costs were. And of course, getting into that, we had to address climate because Hawaii is probably the most rugged climate short of Antarctica. We rust stainless steel here, if that gives you any sense of the corrosiveness of constant sea air, volcanic stuff, earthquakes, the whole nine yards. So we basically from that said, okay, well, let's tackle the insurance problem because that came up about 3 years ago when everybody started, we had the Palisades. Well, the Palisades fire was last year. The one before that, I think, was Paradise. And then we had, of course, in 2024, Hurricane Helene. That's the first hurricane we ever had in America that went 550 miles inland and took out Ashland, North Carolina. So the weather was getting worse. Of course, we're very environmentally conscious here anyway. And so we said, okay, how do we address all the existing houses? Because most of what we had focused on was building new stuff. And so that's when one of our engineers basically said, "Oh, let's bring artificial intelligence into it." And the next thing we heard was this giant sucking sound of cash going out through the roof because to develop in this area is very expensive. But what our guys came up with is we basically disassembled why these houses are at risk, how the atmosphere affects them, where they are, the fact that you can't just bulldoze 37 million at extreme risk homes. You're going to have come up with a way to fix them in place that's cost effective. So that's where, of course, artificial intelligence came into the picture because you could never do what we're doing now with conventional types of technology. What we determined is that people don't know where to go, what to ask, do I even have a risk? All of these questions that if they're even aware that they have a problem, how do you go about doing it? So we said, okay, well, you're going to have to automate that whole process. So we then started working originally with Apple with LiDAR to be able to take your phone, walk around the house, and it would basically build a 3D twin of it. We were approached by NVIDIA back at the end of last year. They showed us some technology then at the CES show in January, which we're changing over to now, that effectively we record a video of your house and it will determine then size, how many windows, all the particulars, and also what the materials are that it's made out of. And then we feed that in with the aerial photography that we have available. And that builds us a model in the mind's eye, so to speak, of the computer that's 97.3% accurate. So from there, kind of our secret sauce is we re-engineer that property. If you think about just we explode it apart, look at all the pieces that don't meet what would be required under the building codes and the international engineering standards. And then we put it back together with the recommendations that come out that are a permit ready set of plans and budgets that are tuned to their zip code. So they effectively now know what has to be done and how much it's going to potentially cost. And we plug them into a network that we're building of contractors that we're orienting toward doing just this kind of work, And then we said, okay, we did 200 insurance company interviews with people. And the two things that came up all the time is that insurance doesn't really know what's sitting on your property a lot of the time. They know kind of what exists within a zip code, kind of what time of year it was built, but they don't really know specifically what's on your land. And so now we know exactly what's there. So we give them really good granularity for making an insurance decision. And then on the other end of that is how you're going to pay for it. That was the other big deal. So we worked with some people in finance, since that's kind of one of my trades, to come up with what's called mitigation bonds, and that's a real thing. They're getting promoted now by the United Nations DRR, which is the disaster recovery research program that they have. But effectively, you can get the money to be able to do what you need to have done on the house at much below market interest rates, and it's a very has a very low threshold of you being able to qualify for it. And we blend that also. If say you're in California, some cities in California have grants that you don't have to pay back, and we'll blend all that together. And so our contractor can come out. He already knows what needs to be done. All the engineering has been done. He's got a set of plans. He can go file for a permit on the spot. You already have a budget to get the work done, and you already have a mechanism to pay for it. So that's a complete solution pipeline to where the only thing that you need to do is to start out with scanning the house. So our scan module, which we actually put into the app stores, the what we're calling our risk module, which is Magic Window, which is an app in both stores. It's free. And it basically will tell you, do you have a fire risk? Do you have a water risk? Do you have flood risk, drought risks? And kind of on a community level, what you can expect, because it's also got a time machine built into it. If you were kind of going, well, I don't see this happening to my house, you can use a slider and go back to 1950 and see what it looked like before, or you can go all the way out to the year 2100 and see what it's likely to look like. So it gives you that forward vision that you need to say, well, I haven't got a problem today. Yep, that may be true. And I'm really glad to hear you don't have that problem today. But what's that problem going to be in 5 years? Because this is going to get a lot worse. 10 years, worse still. It's where it really starts to hit a tipping point. And we assume that there will be no remediation done on a global level for this problem. So by the time you get to 2050, you see major, major, major storms. You see shifts in weather patterns to where it floods where it didn't before. Drought is going to be a very pervasive component of what's going to be going on. Water is going to become very critical as you move forward. And of course, we wish all the people working on climate remediation at a global level, all the luck and all the work that they're doing, big kudos for that. But we've run a lot of models. We've probably written 10, maybe 12 white papers on this very subject that go into statistical analysis, which is kind of what we're based on. If the climate gets better, great. But we know we have a problem statistically for the next several years that housing is at risk. The insurance companies know it. The real estate people know it. It's just not being discussed because there's just no political will to really talk about it. So I'm kind of a voice in the wilderness to a degree at this point in time, in the sense of kind of saying, we've got a problem coming here, and it's going to be a lot cheaper to address it starting now than when we're immersed in that problem. And so that's, kind of what we saw was being a really key component. If you were to today start a moonshot level program to remediate the atmosphere, and you dedicated all the GDP of all the industrialized nations together for that particular program, the model says 34 years to start to bend the arc back down. So when you kind of look at it, that we're not really doing anything about it, that the numbers basically say this is probabilities are very high, and this is just statistical. We're not getting into the carbon argument. We're just saying this is what it looked like in 1950. This is what it looks like in 60. This is what it looks like today. And so you can extrapolate moving forward what that's going to mean. And we're pretty accurate till for the next 20 years, we're probably better than 50% accurate. And it tapers off by the time, of course, you get to the end of the century. We're maybe like down around 10, 12% accurate. And I hope we are very wrong because people are always asking me, what's the worst city to live in by the time you get out to the end of these models and stuff? And I've gone, you probably wouldn't guess it, but it's Riverside, California. It's got it all. We got earthquakes, we got floods, we got landslides, we got heat, we got fire. Pick one, so that's not a really good place. And the other place that's really a drought issue and temperature, because, humans exist in a very narrow band of temperature. we can't really live in 120 degrees or 125 degrees. It's just beyond our physical capacities. And you about 200 miles north Dallas, when you get out to 2100, the average temperature there is 121. So that's going to be a place that, you're, you're not going to be able to have enough air conditioning. It's going to be able to handle that. In fact, all the air conditioning people tell you that that pretty much craps out when you go past 100. You're now into refrigeration. You're not in air conditioning anymore.
There's an incredible amount to unpack there.
It's a big topic. We've had a hard time telling the message,
Mm-hmm.
because we're out raising money right now to sort of build out the system. And, when you're talking to somebody who's not plugged into this in the venture capital community, they're just kind of looking to answer two or three questions, which is what's
Mm-hmm.
the problem? How do you solve it? How much money do I make, off of getting that done? In order to be able to have that 47-second attention span, uh, to pay attention to your stuff, which actually mathematically they'll look at your card deck for about 2 minutes and 10 seconds. That's it. So if you can't communicate the story in that period of time, and we've spent the last year and a half just trying to bring this thing down to a intelligible, you know, 2 sentence sort of situation, which right now the current, not even 2 cents, really 1 sentence, which is we're adapting disaster endangered residential real estate to climate, and that's kind of what we're dealing with, is adaptation. That's probably the key word to it. And that's also kind of a standardized term within the climate remediation community of, trying to get circular economies and be able to have more ecological practices, hopefully put a little less plastic in the water, which we have the largest plastic island on the planet that's 200 miles north of me. Theoretically, you could walk from Kamchatka to Alaska if you didn't weigh very much, just walk on top of the plastic ocean that's up there.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, let's zero in on the solution. Now, you've talked a lot about it,
Sure.
but it's an interesting framing of the situation because it's not trying to change the policy or navigate the insurance. You essentially said those are what they are. We need to go right into the built environment. We need to improve
Right.
it. We need to engage homeowners, and we need to equip them with tools to make better decisions and also to build better. So if we were to take like a real practical perspective here for a homeowner, what does that
Hmm.
look like when they can now engage your system from, I guess, just across the life cycle of engagement?
I'm going to break it into kind of two bites. First of all, if you're building a new home, then you need to spend the extra 6-7% in order for it to be climate resilient. One of the things that our nonprofit side, which this all came out of, worked on was a spray on aggregate material that you can spray your house with that now is fire resistant to 1200 degrees, different mechanisms you could stick in the walls when you build them that makes it seismic level 9, which is not the San Francisco earthquake, but let's put it this way, the probabilities of you surviving are significantly higher, and also handle 150-mile-an-hour wind load. Now, different places have different requirements. Where my house is, which my house was built with these mechanisms and these new materials. So my house is actually fire, wind, and seismic resistant. And we just had an earthquake last Friday night, which was a 6.0. And we had 150 homes around here that were seriously damaged, some that slid down the mountain. And in my particular case, we walked around after it and we had 3 pictures that weren't hanging square anymore. So the home itself, literally, it moves as one, I guess is the best way to describe it. But in new construction, very important, build it in now. Spend the extra money because otherwise you're going to be spending it later. And it's a lot cheaper to do this kind of stuff when the walls are open and you're pouring concrete and stuff. The second thing is you're going to have to really entertain the fact that if you live in a risk area, and a lot of people have if they don't know it, like Northern California, people in Northern California know they have a fire problem. If you're living in Florida, you have a wind, flood, and hurricane problem. Now the issue is that how do I know how to fix this? Most people don't know a home inspector. They don't know an engineer. They don't know somebody who would do takeoffs and budgeting for construction to know how much it's going to cost. And we automate all three of those first stages. When you walk around the house and you do your scan, which is it's AI driven in the sense of it's talking to you as you're shooting video. And after you walk around it the first time for the house, then you turn around, you walk around and you shoot it for the lot. So it's looking at both at the house and outside of the house to the edges of your property. And then as a result of that, we take it from there in the sense that we can tell you what the risks are. We can tell you because we don't have to do a home inspection. There's $800 you don't spend. You don't have to bring in an engineer. That could be a couple of thousand or more. Some people say you can do it for less than 1,000, and I'm sure that there are people out there who could do that particular work. But we also know that to be able to really do it correctly, it needs to be standardized. Every house needs to be looked at with the same set of check boxes, so to speak. And then, of course, pricing that out, which in the case of our system, we're bringing in data from a service that works for contractors that go around to different parts of the country. And they keep track of what labor costs by all the trades, how much materials cost in your area. So when we put together an estimate, we know what the work is, we know what the materials are, we know what that represents in the way of labor to get it done. So we can extract that down to, oh, well, that house is going to cost $20,000 to do. The average that we came up nationwide is probably in the range of about $30,000 to $40,000 for these remediations. Some of them may run up as high as 100. Some of them could be as low as 10. But knowing what to do is what's important. And also another thing too is we feel that the general contractors that are out there and the remediation contractors need to be trained on how to do this work. So that's kind of part of our program because if we're standardizing prices and we know what it should cost in your zip code, then we need to make sure that the guy that we connect you to or two or three guys that we connect you to, they're the ones that are going to buy the plans and they're going to basically do the work for you. They're going to pull the permits. They're going to certify the work when it's done so that we can now put that back in the system and give it to your insurance carrier. So now we've basically said, you've gone out there, you've done this work, this house has been hardened to, a building code, an engineering standard. And so now your fire risk has gone from say an 8 to maybe a 3 or a 4. Your wind risk has gone from maybe a 7 to a 5 or whatever the numbers score out. We've been debating whether or not we're going to score on 100 or score on 10. We generate score at 100 right now, but we're wondering if there's too much granularity for the consumer. It's a lot easier to go, oh, I'm a 7 out of 10 than it is to say I'm an 87.3 out of 100. Too much math to have to do. So the whole idea is to make it simple, make it clean, transparent, easy to understand. And for that contractor, that set of plans he's going to buy are going to be based on how much your job is going to cost. So it's a progressive pricing plan because obviously if you're a bigger job, I may be sending you a plan set that's 25 pages, whereas you're a smaller job, maybe 3 in that sense. But we feel that the best thing to do is to involve the professional community, educate the professional community because there's going to be a lot more of this work. It also creates a lot of jobs because it's going to train a lot of new people on how to do this stuff. And if the displacement in the labor markets is to be believed with AI, there's going to be a lot more people who are going to be looking for an income that pays a decent wage. And right now, construction is probably one of the best areas that young people can go into. When I talk to folks that are coming out of school and they're going, well, Jesus, I don't want to go and have $100,000 worth of school debt and become a lawyer. And now all the lawyers are being displaced by artificial intelligence or, a whole series of other jobs that have always been those nice $100,000+ jobs. My niece, is married to a plumber in Chicago. And he makes 150 to $200,000 a year as a plumber, and I'm not saying everybody should become plumbers any more so than carpenters or anything else, but the demand is super high in those markets. It doesn't require you to go into huge amounts of debt, and you can make a good living at it. And so, we feel that there's a real opportunity to train people in this particular area as well. It's like I think any problem that America's ever faced, it's always spun out, new crafts, new jobs, new technology. And we see this as a real game changer on so many levels, which is also why it's been such a hard story to tell to venture capitalists because like I said, they want to see like 3, 5 at the outset, points of what you're dealing with. Things need to be abbreviated down. It's not that they can't grasp it, it's they don't have time to grasp it because they're inundated with people and ideas and stuff every day. So you have to really kind of capture their imagination pretty quick. We've been pretty fortunate in that we came out of this nonprofit setting. We were able to have a lot of our donors over there that footed a lot of the bill that was associated with it. I've personally have put a lot of money into it. We've had other people here in Hawaii that have put money into it. And now we feel that, okay, this is now ready for prime time. It needs to grow to the next level and scale. And that's where, we see over the next 3 years, it's going to need probably 30, $35 million. But it also is going to create a $3.5 billion industry within that period of time as well and generate tens of thousands of jobs. So it's a big plus. It's a pretty much win-win for everybody that's involved in it.
Let's talk about the education portion. What's the major misunderstanding from a consumer perspective and then from an investor perspective?
That's really and I'm a very candid and transparent person, and I say things that some people don't necessarily like as far as that's concerned. But in America, first of all, everybody's running as fast as they can to buy gas, educate the kids. And it's kind of like, I don't need another problem. Okay. And the petroleum industry's done a great job of basically saying 1.5 Celsius, it's the apocalypse. Well, if you're faced with that and having to put groceries on the table and stuff, you're going to go out in the backyard and play with the kids and drink a beer. And you're going to say, well, if it's the apocalypse, I can't do much about that. It's all over. Yeah, I'm just waiting for it to arrive, And so that and a combination of the fact that a lot of people feel that this will happen to Tom up the street in his house, but it's not going to happen to my house. So it's like everybody's at a poker table, and the people who are not taking this seriously are just betting their entire house, which in a lot of cases is your biggest asset you own. And you're pushing all those chips into the middle of the table saying, oh, great, the dice are going to come out, and I'm going to be the lucky seven and I'm going to be the big winner, and the math doesn't work that way. So yeah, Tom's house may get the tornado, but it may also hit your house, or it could be part of Tom's house that hits your house. One of the things we did with our fire resistant material is the underlying layer of it's Kevlar mesh. It'll stop a 2x4 traveling at 95 miles an hour because we had to put something under it anyway. So we were going, why not Kevlar? And so we kind of got a dual benefit out of that in terms of wind resistance as well. But so I think that the consumer breaking through the noise is the difficult problem. And I would address to them that, that the problem is it's real. It's really coming. I can't say it's coming for you, but don't just bet on the fact that it's just going to hit your neighbor and it's not the apocalypse. It's a real problem that we have real weather that's really changing for some reason that I don't even want to get into. I mean, it could be Mother Nature just running another cycle. We could be the beginning of the ice age. Who knows? I don't think anybody can forecast that down. So that's one problem. Now with the money people that on their side of it, and this is kind of sounding cynical, but I worked in the money business for 12 years with high net worth individuals. And the focus of many people who have wealth is to gain more wealth or to protect the wealth that they have. A great deal of people inherited wealth. You have, of course, people like Zuckerberg and Bezos. They went out and they made it. Other people may have gotten it from daddy, granddaddy, great granddaddy. I had one client that was in Australia that he was fifth generation in the cattle business. He didn't even know how many cows he had. So, you just have a level of where other people are focused on making more money and their attention span is to what makes me the most money in the shortest period of time. And even though venture capital does have a certain process that goes through pre-seed, seed, series A, B, C, D, however many, and those have different markers as you're dealing with it. The ultimate situation is very few that I have run into, and I welcome anybody to call me out and challenge me on this. That's not this way, but the people factor in what we're working with here is kind of a side effect in the sense that, yes, this is going to help people. It's going to be good for society, but what's going to be the return on my investment? And am I going to get a 2x, 10x, 100x, whatever it is, return on the money? And we try to weigh out that we've got both of these things going at the same time. And yeah, it's a little bit of a juggling, but we really think that you can do well while you're doing good at the same time. It's one of the reasons we are a public benefit corporation. We see ourselves as infrastructure more than a platform, in fact. We've designed this thing to be global to where I can take and move it into the EU, I can move it into the UK, I can take it to Oz, I can take it wherever the weather is going to go. And when you look at all these global weather patterns over a 50 to 75 year situation, this kind of is like putting indoor plumbing in place because the weather is going to be doing these challenges to us in different ways in different places. So if you've addressed it in terms of a universal way to move water into your house and move effluent out of your house, at the same time, you've now got a mechanism that people can go, hey, I better call and check, see whether or not if my house is future proof as far as that's concerned. Or, hey, we just had a huge fire. I live in a, wilderness border, urban area to where I have a risk of wildfire. I already know it, and in some places, California's doing a great job of addressing wildfire because they don't have a choice. They are in a 20+ year drought, and it looks like it's going to probably be a mega drought, which means that historically that could go on for another 25 years. And that's serious problem if you are looking down the road further than the next quarterly report that comes out, from so-and-so's corporation. Historically, America doesn't look very far down the road, whereas this is one of the things the Chinese have pretty mastered over being around for 6,000 years. They have been able to say, hey, we have a 1 year plan. We've got a 5 year plan. We've got a 100-year plan. We have a 500-year plan, and they're executing on that. Now, you can have all sorts of arguments as to, I don't believe in the America's in decline and they're in the rise. I think it's a foot race. I think it's going to be a foot race for a long time. It may have where somebody's, leading in the third furlong, and then the lead's going to change back and forth. I don't know whether I would ever live to see America not be in the position that it's in now, but it's got more challenges. And one of these that we're not addressing is this problem. And I mean, just do the math. If you have $11 trillion worth of real estate at risk, and that's what the number is today, it's $11 trillion. Let's just say we have over the next few years, 10% of that get wiped out. That's a big number. You're dealing with $1.1 trillion. That's going to hit the GDP. Not to mention that it's a cascading problem in the sense that if you don't have insurance, you're probably not going to have a mortgage because 62% of people do have a mortgage that requires you to have insurance. So if the insurance side of it just continues to contract or becomes totally unaffordable, then you're going to go into default on that mortgage. Not your fault. The weather brought it on and you can't get it insured. Well, if you can't do that, now all of those loans are going to go in default with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It comes right back around to the taxpayer at the end of the day. And that's just the economic impact. We also have the issue of the sociological impact. Now, if I have all these areas that I can't get insurance, I'm sure not going to go in there and build with cash. You take basically my piggy bank and stick it on the beach somewhere in Texas. Okay. Then I'm going to be basically in a position that I'm going to have to move. I'm going to have to go where there are the resources that people need, which is why you see so many different cities formed. They're around lakes, they're around the ocean. We don't build a whole lot of stuff in the middle of the deserts, although I'm not saying there's not things out there, but it's more challenging, especially with water in that sense. So, when you start creating these property deserts that people can't live in, these folks have got to go somewhere. And so what are we going to do? Now we're going to go and plow under all the cornfields in Iowa and we're going to build low income housing. So, it just scrambles the equation that we've been working with now for hundreds of years. And again, like I'm saying, it's not anybody's fault. It's just that the planet is changing. The ocean is getting warmer. And one of the things, of course, that, I read a lot and I stay real attuned to things. We're pulling all of our weather buoys out of the ocean. That they have another 10 years of service life on them. But for some reason, at a federal level, we've decided we are going to pull all of those buoys out of the water, hundreds of them. So we will no longer now have that information that we feed to other countries who have got their buoys in terms of being able to monitor the oceans. And the oceans is the root of all of this weather situation. The water gets warmer, changes the evaporation cycle, rains where it didn't before, doesn't rain where it should have. You look at some of our models and you get out to 2075. Technically, the Imperial Valley in California, which is one of that's where we get our vegetables and fruits and all that other stuff from, will have pumped all the groundwater and will no longer be irritable land. So we're now going to be in a situation to where it's going to start to affect agriculture. It's just, the whole thing is this series of dominoes, and housing is kind of a key part of it. I was on a podcast in New Zealand that talks about urban planning and cities and stuff. And one of the things that, at least from their reaction, had not been brought up, and that is cities are like beehives. They're composed of individual homes. If you have no homes, you do not need shopping centers, churches, and gas stations. Okay, so all of that comes back around to where people live. If people have no place to live, then everything starts looking like the streets in Los Angeles these days. So it's a situation that we've got to protect our infrastructure that is key to our survival as a society. That's my
Absolutely.
soapbox. That's my
Absolutely
soapbox.
incredible. Well, I'm glad that you were on your soapbox because people need to hear that. It was very well articulated. Lots of topics that I never could have come up with or guided the conversation that way. I'm fascinated by all the knowledge that you have and all the reference
thank you.
points and the things that are going on in the world, like whether it's the buoys or the temperature change and the domino effect that spawns from that, where it's like there is data backing this. We're seeing it. We're just looking at it pragmatically. Here's statistically what's happening. Good for people to know, and to keep in the back of their head as they go about their days. And then also from a larger systemic or systems thinking, which is like the beehive analogy. If people are not present, if people are not living here, what is the fallout of that? What is some of the greater consequence? There's not going to be businesses there. What does that mean in terms of relocation? And what's also interesting is from a material standpoint, are people deconstructing what they've built or do they just abandon it? And then you could point to cities like Detroit that actually were just abandoned. People didn't deconstruct it and move somewhere else. They just left. And those cities were essentially left to rot as a result. And
back in the day, they had what
blemish.
was, urban renewal, which was one of the worst federal programs that was probably ever implemented because it really stoked the fire of things like Detroit. And of course now Detroit, when the automotive industry moved out, there's a whole series of factors that kind of resulted in that problem. But at the end of the day, people have to have a place to live.
Hmm.
And all these other support services revolve around that fact that a person has to have a place to live. I
Hmm.
wrote an essay that's going to be up on my Substack here probably later this week about some people were talking about how we need to be focused in on people's health, and that this was the number one topic that we needed to, really be putting energy and stuff behind. And I was basically taking kind of a contrarian view in the sense of saying that if you haven't got a place to live, your health is really going to suffer,
Hmm.
and because it's like when you get sick, where are you? You're in bed, you're on the couch in your house. Okay. So, you know, we're not doing a great job of taking care of ourselves as Americans anyway. Our life expectancy is going in the wrong direction already. But to all of a sudden now just add to the fact that we have an unaffordable housing situation, we don't, which is driven by not having enough housing to a great
Hmm.
extent. We've underbuilt. The cost of housing is being built for a lot of it for the boomers, of which I am in that generation, and they're retiring and they're downsizing and they're moving into more senior living communities. And they also are have got houses that they spent $40,000 to build in 1955 or something like that that are now in this market. They can get millions of dollars for them, and so they're holding on to these too. So that just adds to more lack of inventory. The builders are building homes that are really not targeted to the people who need these houses. There's this huge chasm between what they call affordable housing, which has really become affordable rental housing, um, and the other end of that, which is the people who can buy into either one of these homes the boomers are selling, or in the older neighborhoods that may have been the boomers' starter house that they had back in the 50s. But a starter house is still $400,000. I mean, and if you are getting ready to also now have this great disruptor with artificial intelligence, you know, there's just really so many aspects of this problem that aren't getting enough attention. And it's difficult to have political will nowadays to address some of this. We are working off of flood maps that are decades too old. And there's the FEMA maps are, for the most part, I say they're pretty much useless.
Hmm.
We build our own from other sources for flood, and what our risk analysis stuff is that we do. And but when you think about it, okay, you're living in XYZ town, and you have ABC on Joy Street, and we're above the 100-year floodplain. We redraw the maps. Now you're in the 100-year floodplain. Okay, so the value of your house just went down. Your insurance just went up. No politician is going to want to hear that at a public meeting.
Hmm.
That why did you redraw these maps? So even though these things are really necessary to plan for the future, there's no political will to really address it at this point, at least for that one particular situation. And of course, insurance is just kind of trying to work their way around it. We've got several companies now that have come into being that just are working the risk problem, and a lot of them are doing really good work. But they carry the risk up to your doorstep and just drop it. So now you're going, my insurance is going up. What am I going to do about this? The mortgages, they're starting to price in what this risk is for your house, in addition to the insurance companies that are pricing this information in. And that information is not necessarily known to the broad public. They tried to put it on Zillow, and in this particular case, the California Realtor Board raised such a ruckus about it, they pulled it back off because they said it was what was constituting a 5% drop in sales. Because now people were saying, well, I don't need a house that's got this risk score that says that I'm going to be in this zone that's dangerous to me. So nobody was buying the houses. So the approach has been to play hide the sausage as opposed to just confront what the issue is, and that is, can you fix the house? The bottom, and our numbers say that if you were to really get our program going full steam within 20 years, you could probably rescue 70% of our inventory. Now, that's not to say the other part of it's doomed, But the other part of it is going to have to still suffer what the risk scores are, because it's like, if I have a clapboard Cape Cod house built on the cliffs in Rhode Island, and all of a sudden these northeaster storms are going to come in there, it's going to blow it down. It's a 125-year-old structure, so either you're going to spend however many thousands of dollars to harden that structure, which too, if you own a really nice one of the mansions there, I feel sure like Taylor Swift has a lovely home there that's been hardened, in Newport. But for the average person, which constitutes the 37 million homes that are extreme risk, tiny, tiny percentage of those are the people who they could afford to do it. And many of them are doing it now anyway. They're not waiting for when the fire comes or waiting when the flood comes. They're dealing with it now. I have a friend in Alabama, and I'm originally from Tennessee. So we used to go down to the Alabama Gulf Coast all the time in the summertime. Anyway, he has now jacked his house, which is like about 2 blocks off the ocean. I think he said he put it up on 15-foot concrete pillars, and just it cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars. But, of course, he's sitting on a piece of real estate that's like, 10 steps from the ocean. So in his case, the land was just the location was well worth hardening that property. Now that's one of the exceptions to the rule. We're focused in on everybody's property. If you can afford to jack your house 14 feet off the ground, and you can afford to be on that location anyway, then you're probably going to do just fine. You can hire the engineer and you can hire the inspectors and everybody to do that. But what about the guy that's more like, let's say, half a mile off the water or a mile off the water? I mean, with Hurricane Helene, we had the first hurricane in the United States that went 550 miles inland to Ashland, North Carolina. Who would have ever thought that? But like I said, these storms are getting more severe. They're going to places where they hadn't been before. We've already been in tornado season. We've seen numerous tornadoes that have been highly destructive that have gone through. And we have two alleys for tornadoes now. I can't really tell you when the second one came into being, or the first for that fact. But we had one always that we know about, went through Oklahoma, Missouri, Nebraska, kind of the one of our ag belts that's through there, where the Dust Bowl went through, et cetera, Kansas. And that one's been around in, a lot. One of the more famous scenes is the entire town in Missouri that just was sucked off the face of the earth like a Hoover vacuum cleaner and deposited 10 miles, down the highway somewhere, and that was kind of a precursor, I think, of what some of this extreme weather in that case, because hurricanes spin off tornadoes. So a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm not on the beach. Well, yeah, you're not going to get the storm surge, probably, unless it goes up that, the inland waterway or that river that you're also next to, but it's a global problem. We just happen to manifest the highest amount of dollar value out there. There's 100 million, there's 100 million homes that constitute 40%, $40 trillion in real estate globally. In the United States, we have 37 million of that 100. We're hanging out, around $11 trillion. I think it's 11.8, something like that. But the bottom line to it is that you got to get ahead of the problem. That's when it's the cheapest to address the situation we're dealing with in the political environment. This too shall pass, as they say. It all runs in cycles, So, if the pendulum is swung this far to the denial side, hopefully we're going to see an equal amount of acceptance and action that's on the other side. And as I tell, people, every time that we have a disaster, my phone rings. I don't like that. I'd much prefer to not hear about, things being as bad as they have the potential to be, or have actually been. After the Paradise Fire, I got a phone call, and they were saying, well, what do you think about that? And I said, well, that's a very old neighborhood. Houses are packed really tightly together. But then again, there was an architect that was on CNN, I think the next day, who had already anticipated this, and he had hardened his house. And it was literally his house in the middle of this field of ashes. And so that just kind of, to me, reinforced the point that you can take some action. It requires initiative. It requires having to accept some things you may not want to accept. It may mean you're going to take on some debt you didn't want to have. But at the same time, if you do the hardening on the house, the same study that came out that said you're losing 1.2% year over year, you can get 6 to 8% more for your house over appraisal if it's hardened. So there's financial, balances that are in place here. But as it continues to be worse, then you're going to see bigger areas that are not going to be insurable. And I've got this is another piece I've been working on. And there's this animosity between the insurance company and the insurance, policy holder, in the sense that it's like he gets his bill in the mail and he gets really pissed off, at his insurance company, and he picks up the phone and he starts yelling at the insurance company, why? And the insurance company's going, we don't understand. Don't you love us anymore? We've been together now for 20 years, and the homeowner doesn't understand that insurance people aren't doing this by choice. It's an economic model. And when the risk is too high, then it becomes insolvent, and then you have no insurance opportunities. So if you can do your part, then I see the insurance company is more than willing to do their part because they want to write policies. That's how they make money. And so in this particular case, again, if we can build a bridge between these two people, and we believe construction is really the roadway on that bridge between those 2 points, then maybe they won't be quite as at odds with each other. And in the middle of that, we can create some jobs and lower what our overall social risk is to this problem.
Well, as we wrap up here, just a few minutes left, Ben, I want to give you a call to action. And for folks who had a lot to digest in this episode, first of all, go back, re-listen. And if they pick something out and they want to reach out to you, how should they get in touch and what are you prioritizing right now?
Of course, we're in the middle of a fundraiser right now. That's a big thing. If there's anybody's out there in the VC community, particularly the climate sector of the VC community, would love to hear from you. We'd love to be able to tell you what the story is, see how it works, and to understand that we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just adapting things that have existed with a few new things like AI in order to be able to solve a problem. Same thing Henry Ford when he built the assembly line. And you can go and reach me at futureproof.org at the website. At that website, you can go to my calendar. You can book time with me. I basically am available to anybody in 15, 30, and 1 hour sessions, depending on who you are and what you want to talk about. I'm also very, very active on LinkedIn. LinkedIn being kind of a more professional social media, and you can just type me up, Ben Gilliland. I'll pop to the top of the screen. And I think last but not least is I've got a new website and a new message center, I guess you would say, for what we're talking about. That's kind of offline from the company side of it. It's called Resonant Structures. And this is where we kind of talk about what things are made out of in the sense of almost getting down to a molecular level with that. And the fact that everything fundamentally comes down to energy and that your home is just a representation of that energy. We also talk about, I have one piece that's a video that'll be up here. It's in editing now. That is, who owns our water? A lot of people don't understand that in America, most of the water has been bought up by private equity now. It's no longer, they've made deals with municipal governments. They buy up the land that the water sits on top of. All the bottled water, other than Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, is owned by one company now. In the United States, they've bought out Nestle and everybody else. So you don't really own the water. And the bad part about that is that in America, we do not recognize a constitutional right to have water, to drink water. We can buy it, we can trade it, we can sell it, we can spray it, but you don't have a right to it. Those rights are all privately held, so to speak. So that's what that particular video is about. And it's a little dystopian because it basically it makes the assumption that if the climate goes really south and we start having droughts like these mega droughts on the West Coast, then these people who have bought up all these rights and stuff to it are going to have a big payday. And that I personally am an advocate that if you want to own bottled water companies, then that's great. You basically are getting paid for putting the water into the bottles, and you pay for that water with whatever deal you cut from the source of it. But the water itself is a national treasure, so to speak, just like you have with our national parks. That it cannot be control. It needs to be more like our rivers than our waterways, which are public utilities, so to speak. I think you're going to see AI head that way too. That it's ultimately going to grow to the point it's going to be like the phone company. And you were probably around when they broke up what was referred to at the time as Ma Bell, and you had all these regional telephone things that were all under one, umbrella with AT&T, and they basically said you couldn't do that because it's a utility. And the internet's that way with it now. The internet situation, you're not going to move into a house that you can't get internet, even if it's on your hotspot on your cell phone. And, the smartphone is a component of life, in today's society. So I think that we need to take a hard look at water in that sense, because it could lead to a bad place. And the first three books that I wrote when I was in Key West were about a dystopian event that occurred with a pandemic. And at the time, this was 2003, that the new society was built on the back of a small device that was a smartphone. We hadn't even built smartphones yet. So it was like kind of crazy that all of a sudden here I am writing about stuff, which I never published the book, but I had an editor that said it was too dark. Nobody would buy it. Dystopianism was not as popular. Nowadays, dystopianism probably would sell. But anyway, though, it talked about mass death with, diseases and pandemics and all sorts of stuff, and societies that had to change how they adapted to it. But anyway, though, I really appreciate you giving me some of your time today, Matthew, and your audience. And like I said, anybody wants to get in touch with me, particularly, I go out and I do speaking engagements. I do, of course, these types of shows. I'm going to really be amping up a lot more of probably getting out and try to do more corporate speaking stuff and going to some of the, obviously the industry, trade shows like, CES and then NVIDIA and Web Summit. I just came back from that one in Vancouver. Vancouver is, in fact, just remarkable. They're building their own version of Silicon Valley up there. The government's building a huge supercomputer, giant data centers. They've had 100,000 people move to Vancouver in the tech industry, and they're supporting them. It's amazing, amazing stuff.
Incredible.
But anyway, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I'll have links to all the things that you mentioned in the show notes so that people can check that out. I encourage them to click on that, engage with you. And then, of course, if folks enjoyed the episode, please consider 5 stars, like, subscribe wherever you're at, and continue to support amazing guests like Ben. All right, Ben, I appreciate the
Thanks a
conversation.
lot. I appreciate it.
All the
Aloha.
best.